And whoa, look at Magoo. Magoo streaks into the...
Thorpe's got past Gavors. They lock handlebars as they go through, but Thorpe's done.
Here comes Bradshaw to the outside of Bale. He takes over the number 2 position, and Bradshaw is not done.
Welcome, Motocross History Team. Today I want to talk about one of the greatest, if not the greatest, Motocross and Supercross rookie class of all time. In order to do that, I wanted to break down first the process through which motocross racers enter into their rookie class, their rookie year. Now, by the rookie year, I'm only referring to the Premier class. And that's one of the reasons why I am showing background clips here for a couple minutes of Jorge Prado, because he officially became a rookie in the Premier class this year. Now, there are a myriad of ways in which riders can make that decision to move up to the Premier class, thereby beginning their rookie year. One of those ways is the way that Jorge Prado decided to do. He was a 4-time MXGP champion and decided he wanted to give racing in the United States a shot, and specifically Supercross. And if that story sounds familiar, it's because it is. I just put out a video on Jean-Michel Bale, who decided to do the same thing in 1990 and moved to the United States and wanted to race full-time Supercross and Motocross in 1990, thereby making 1990 his rookie year in the Premier class. And that's the year that I'm referring to that put out perhaps the greatest rookie class of all time. Now, in order to put that into perspective, let's take a look at this year's, as an example, this year's rookie class of 2026. By and large, it's not really given a lot of attention, and it hasn't for several years unless there's a major standout. Now, the most common way is for riders to come out of the, back then, during the two-stroke era, out of the 125 class when they feel that they're ready, or after they win 1 or 2 125 Supercross titles, and to enter into the Premier class the very next year, thereby making it their rookie year. And those people, those riders are kind of looked at like, oh, they won a championship in the 125 class. Maybe we'll watch them with a little bit closer of an eye. Now, the last big standout year that was exciting to watch a rookie class was probably 2024, when Jet and Hunter Lawrence moved up into the Premier class. Jet Lawrence won it that year, won the Supercross title that year, and Hunter Lawrence also did very well. They had both won their 250 divisional Supercross rounds. Everybody's getting excited for 2027 because Hayden Deegan announced that he's going to enter the Premier class next year. But this year's Supercross rookie class was meh. You had RJ Hampshire, who was hurt most of the time. You had Austin Forknew, who is currently hurt, and I think switched brands at a certain point. He now rides for Triumph, and he has not done what everybody thought he would. Garrett Marchbanks, who's definitely performed well below what people thought he would do. People thought he would do really well on a 450 because of his size. And you also have Jordan Smith, who also started off the year injured. So something that used to be a common occurrence that is not really done as much anymore, was that, let's take the late 80s, early 90s, for example. Late 80s, when riders started dominating the 125 Supercross regional class. And let's say, for instance, Damon Bradshaw, 1989, raced the East Coast Supercross Series. And when the series overall would switch to the West Coast, instead of taking time off, he would actually enter himself into a West Coast race, but in the Premier class. So a clip that I'm going to show you here, he decided to do that with the San Diego Supercross. And so that's exactly what Damon Bradshaw did, and that's when things got exciting. Now, I got this Moto World clip from the 1989 season, February Moto World, and it's going to show first the San Diego round, and it's going to concentrate a lot on Ricky Johnson because he was on a tear that year, and I think this is the 4th race of the season. He'd won the first 3, and it's also going to concentrate on another, what would be a 1990 rookie in Jeff Matasevich, who was also on a tear. The first 3 races were on the West Coast, and both Ricky Johnson and Jeff Matasevich were undefeated in their respective 125 and 250 classes. And so it goes into a lot of that. But what it didn't really go into was that Damon Bradshaw had entered that San Diego 250 Supercross race. And Damon Bradshaw raised a couple of eyebrows because he ended up finishing on the podium that day. And you can see here. But it was most of this clip here concentrates on how well Ricky Johnson did, because I think it was this race where he equaled Bob Hanna's record of 27 wins. But the fact that Ricky Johnson, who by far was considered the best rider in the world at that time, and here you have this 17-year-old kid that's keeping up with him in the premier class, was a big deal. And that used to happen from time to time, where the 125 riders, especially in Supercross, would kind of test the waters to see how well they did in a 250 Supercross race. It was on the opposite coast. One of the other future rookies that would be a premier class rookie in 1990, Jeff Chicken Matasevich, he was on a tear. And put yourself back into 1989 for a second. If many of you remember, while it was fun to watch Damon Bradshaw, everybody thought that Jeff Matasevich was the faster rider. He was more prepared to go into the premier class for 1990. They thought that he would get into the premier class and start doing damage immediately, which he did. He did a great job. He darn near won the 250 Supercross title for 1990. But he was on a tear early in the 1989 Supercross season, because on the West Coast, the first 4 races were on the West Coast, kind of like it is now, and he had won every single one of those races. I mean, he pretty much put the fans to sleep in the stands, figuratively speaking, because just like they did with Ricky Johnson, everybody pretty much figured that in a West Coast 125 race, Jeff Matasevich was going to win that race. Now, if I'm not mistaken, he had Mike LaRocco in the class with him, who ended up winning 3 titles throughout his career. Nowadays, the premier class is nowhere near that, aside from those standouts, which you end up hearing about 2 or 3 years in advance. Like, let's say Hayden Deegan right now. We've been hearing for 2 years now that he's going to move up to the 450 class in 2027. And there have been all these little kind of hints that maybe it'll happen sooner, and which is annoying because it never did. At this Miami round, which also concentrated more on Rick Johnson because he broke Bob Hanna's record, ended up being his 28th Supercross win, which nobody had managed to achieve at that point in motocross history. But quietly, Jean-Michel Bale got second place in that Supercross race. And after this race, he would end up going back, and after winning Gatorback, he would end up going back to Europe to race the 250 MXGP and would win the world title that year. So there wasn't a lot of attention put on those what would be future rookies, and that ended up being what was one of the biggest surprises, because nobody expected the rookies to be as good as they were in 1990. Now, before I move on, and just because I'm a huge Damon Bradshaw fan, I want to show you a clip, a recap of this 125 Miami Supercross. Damon Brad, one of his best performances of all time. So Bradshaw got one of two starts that we were all familiar with him getting. Either he would start off the race by just smoking everybody, getting a whole shot and just leaving everybody in the rearview mirror, or he would crash in the first lap. And he ended up doing both. He got the whole shot and he crashed in the first lap. He ends up slicing through the pack, being in last place, gets up to third place, and was on his way to in passing the second place rider at the time was Coleman, and he ends up, wouldn't you know it, going down again, and picks himself back up again, and ends up catching Coleman, and then set his sights on the leader of the race at the time, Ty Davis, Zip Ty Davis, if you guys remember him. And he then ran down Ty Davis and ended up doubling or tripling jumps that should have been doubles to make up time, and ended up beating Ty Davis in what was one of the most exciting 125 races. Definitely the most exciting 125 race that year. The rider who he beat to earn that 125 national Supercross East Coast title by 1 point was Mike Kudrowski, another who would end up being another 1990 Premier Class rookie. Now, as you can see, these are the results of the San Diego 250 Supercross race. Damon Bradshaw made the podium, and these are the results of the Miami Supercross race. Jean-Michel Bell getting second place. Also, Larry Ward in 10th place. And, of course, this was the Atlanta race, where you can also see Mike LaRocco and Jean-Michel Bell finishing in the top 10. Now, the reason why I wanted to show you this is because this never happens, especially nowadays. Imagine if you were to see riders from the feeder class finishing in the top 10 in the opposite coast in the Premier Class. People would go crazy. The pundits, the analysts would go crazy the following week when talking about the previous race. Now, I wanted to share the identity of some of those 1990 Premier Class rookies. First, as I said before, you got Jeff Chicken Matasevich, who had won the 88 and 89 125 West Coast Series, and who was, most people had their money on him doing good things in the 250 class. You also had Larry Ward, who was right up there at his level, at Matasevich's level, who ended up winning the 1990 Seattle Supercross. Matasevich won the Las Vegas Supercross. Damon Bradshaw would win 5 events as a rookie in 1990. Mike Kudrowski did not win any events, but he finished on the podium, I think 7 times, almost half the races, which is still crazy. Mike LaRocco also fared very well that year and ended up being a future 3-time national champion. And, of course, your foreign entry in Jean-Michel Bell, who would also win 5 events that year. So I wanted to show you this. This is the final top 10 results of the 1990 season when it was all said and done. 6 of the 10 were rookies. Can you imagine that happening today? 6 of the 10 finishers of the overall results for the 450 2026 Supercross season, 6 of them being rookies. That would blow everybody's mind. So one of the ways for pundits, analysts, fans to be able to kind of gauge how the upcoming rookies in the Premier Class were going to do in the upcoming year was to watch the off-season or the preseason races, like Geneva, Bercy, even Tokyo. And one of those races was actually, back then, an outdoor race called Fast Cross, and this occurred in Arsago, Italy. And I don't think they hold it anymore, but this was actually the first preseason invitational that would be held to be able to watch who would be the upcoming rookies in the Premier Class for 1990. It was actually held in September of 1989 during the end of the Outdoor Nationals, and this particular race and this particular year
Damon Bradshaw was invited to race at Fast Cross, and he was in the middle of a huge battle in the 125 class with Mike Kiedrowski, and he was barely leading it by just a couple of points. Now, the clip that I'm showing you here is the 1990 Fast Cross race, and I'll do a piece on that later. But even some of the upcoming 1990 250 MXGP rookies were shown here. One of them being Alessandro Puzzar, who was an Italian native, who ended up winning the world title that year in the 250 class. Now, because it was an invitational, all the people that were invited, the racers that were invited, were given a very large sum to get to the start gate. And just think for a second, put yourself in the team factory positions. Your rider is being invited toward the end of an outdoor series in which he is battling for the title, and you plan on taking him to this invitational. It's crazy to think about, and I don't think they would get away with it in this day and age.
Fast Cross is one of those little hidden gems that was always a great race between European or international riders and American riders going head to head. And this one was no exception. Now, the commentating on this one was a little hard to stick with. And so I'm going to do a little bit of color commentating as we go through this race. At a certain point, the winner of the race ends up taking over first place, probably 3/4 of the way through, and I'll stop it there. But here you have the dudes on the starting gate. You got Guy Cooper, who was racing the 125 outdoor. You have, like I said, Damon Bradshaw, who's wearing number 7 at the time. You got Johnny O'Mara that showed up there. And you have Mike LaRocco, who was still on a Yamaha at the time, even though he was going to be switching over to Suzuki. He probably already had his ride already set to go. Even Larry Brooks made a showing with his glasses. There was a shot of Travis Parker. There's Alessandro Puzzar, who, because it was happening in Italy, the crowd was way behind this guy. And of course, it was promoted by Camel. Just a quick thought about that one. It doesn't seem like that long ago if you've lived somewhat of a life, but motocross events that were put on by cigarettes at the time, that just blows me away. But as you can see here, Alessandro Puzzar gets the whole shot and gets out in front, and the crowd goes absolutely crazy. Now, you can kind of hear in the background the commentator, and that's why I decided to do some color commentary over this, because it is hard to listen to this dude's voice. Nothing against him. He's doing it in a foreign language, so kudos to that guy. But this is your typical Italian track with some high-flying jumps, narrow surfaces, good soil. But I think that they went out of their way, whoever designed this track, to make it kind of high-flying, because they knew that that was what the Americans liked. It wasn't much of the taste of the European fans at the time to have huge jumps. They thought that was an American thing, and they didn't like that. So you have Larry Ward that gets out in front, like right behind Alessandro Puzzar, Larry Ward is wearing number 12, but you got Puzzar that's very familiar with this track on his Chesterfield RM250, and he's sticking with Puzzar, even though I'm sure Puzzar has much more knowledge about this track than anyone else. A little bit of an inside line, no pun intended. But you got Larry Ward that's sticking very closely to him, that's still riding a Honda, even though I'm sure his factory deal was done with Suzuki by that time. And then you have Mike LaRocco and Damon Bradshaw, who are inching closer to the two front runners at the time. This is a great battle between Larry Ward and Puzzar. But as you can see, Puzzar's style was so fluid and so effortless when he rode that it was such a pleasure to watch this guy. If you can find any footage, and I'll continue to put some out, but if you can find good footage on Puzzar
in 1990, 1991, 1992, especially those 3 years when he raced for Chesterfield. He was the 250 MXGP World champion in 1990, and it was between pretty much him and Parker until Parker got hurt. And in 1990, Puzar, as a rookie, ran away with it. It wasn't even close. And so here you have, back to the race, you have Bradshaw that is trying to inch closer to Larry Ward. He actually was able to pass him for a split second, and then of course ends up making a mistake, and Larry Ward sticks with the second spot. The voice of this commentator, I love it. So once again, Larry Ward does the right thing, studies the lines of Puzar, and gets little by little gets closer to him. Now, I don't know what the weather was like in Arsago, Italy in September, but it looks warm. Now, you have Damon Bradshaw just tearing the track up, doing whatever he can to get to the front, and it's working out for him. Obviously, riding over his head, but at the same time, the guy's 17 years old. So Damon Bradshaw is just going to let it all hang out. And on top of that, he's not racing for any points. He's not. There is no title to be won at the end of this. He's already received, I'm sure, a nice sum of money just to show up to this race. And as you know, so Damon Bradshaw makes his way around Larry Ward pretty handily and goes after Puzar in the whoops. Of course, Americans had whoops down by that time, and just scoots past Puzar effortlessly and is out jumping, out riding, outperforming. Of course, Damon Bradshaw, if you want to talk about fluid, when he wasn't flying off the track, he had some of the best natural talent of any rider that I've ever watched. Stefan Everts decided to enter this race. He was racing for Suzuki at the time too, and he was cutting his teeth. He's the same age as Damon Bradshaw, so these guys' careers, they kind of paralleled each other on different continents. So Damon Bradshaw, obviously in his last lap, is playing to the crowd. It was a big deal back then when Americans would come over to Europe to dazzle the crowd, give them a thumbs up, point at them, do your tricks, do things of that nature, and the crowd would go pretty much crazy. Damon Bradshaw ends up winning it, and with pretty little effort, and the crowd, as we know, or many of you know that have followed motocross, you know that Europeans take their motorsports way more seriously than Americans do, and so this was a big deal for them. And so that is your kind of 101 history of rookie riders, and perhaps the greatest rookie class of all time, and where it actually ended up starting. Arsago, Italy, September of 1989, with Bradshaw's win at Fast Cross. Please leave a comment. Let me know how you felt watching this in 1989, this 1989 footage, and leave a comment. And until next time, thanks for watching.